thing working? Give me some sound over here.
Yeah.
The Out of Bounds Show is powered by the award-winning golf courses at Dancing Rabbit Golf Club in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
The leader of the Mark Curls fan club joins us on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 1059 The Zone, brought to you by Eye Care Professionals. If you need cataract surgery, Dr. Kirk Jeffries, Eye Care Professionals, with 2 locations on Lakeland Drive. In Jackson, Flowood, Belmead. If you need cataract surgery, you want to go to Eye Care Professionals and Dr. Kirk Jeffries and the team at Eye Care Professionals. Mississippi State coming off a loss to Georgia. I don't think anybody expected them to win, but maybe wanted some, maybe it to look a little bit better. And then the officiating was, we don't usually go there, but it was atrocious. It was bad. Some head scratchers there on intentional grounding, not reviewing a fumble, and so on. We welcome in Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, Gene's Page, 247 Sports. Steve, are you inviting Mark Curls to your next book signing?
No, I'm not. The fact that he is still officiating games in the Southeastern Conference is an embarrassment to this league. He was the white hat in the crew last year that had the bad call against Memphis. He had a couple dubious calls last year, so they demoted him to a center judge, but he is still exerting his influence over Southeastern Conference games, and once McDade and Greg Sankey get enough of it, they'll fix it.
I don't understand why they haven't. Is the pool of candidates so small? Because most people don't get into officiating in high school. You know, you start to, I'm sure you did. I don't know if you did, Steve. I started calling baseball games in 9th grade, just when I could get a driver's license, and then did basketball and went all the way up and was about to do college. And then I figured out I needed to go do some other things. But what is the pool of candidates so small that they can't move off of someone unless they like cost Nick Saban a game with 5 seconds left? And how do you see this?
Well, I don't know that I totally agree with that because, Jeff Batts is the guy that threw the block in the back flag on Dedrick Thomas in Tuscaloosa. That he got demoted and he hadn't officiated a Southeastern Conference game since then. And then last year, the back judge that blew the punt dead and then didn't own up to it, he also didn't do it. So there is some measure of accountability. I'd like to know who Mark Curls has pictures of, So.
All right. Some of our listeners have asked, you and I, and they knew you were coming on, and so they were debating. You and I talk about talent and recruiting all the time throughout the year, whatever sport. And we always talk about upgrading on this, whatever you're doing, starting pitching in baseball, the 3-hitter in baseball, the point guard. If Chris Jans had a shooter this year, he'd probably be going to the NCAA tournament. So he needs, I think you and I can safely say, he needs to even though he's doing a hell of a job, he needs to upgrade on perimeter shooting. So the listeners, these MSU listeners asked, you always talk about upgrading wide receivers, offensive line, edge rushers, so on. Why can't you even broach the topic of upgrading at the quarterback position? Why is that such a volatile or whatever topic in your opinion, Steve?
Well, I don't necessarily know that it is. I mean, this is the first year they didn't bring in a transfer quarterback since Will Rogers has been there. Of course, KJ came in with Will, hoping to be the stopgap guy while Will's developed. And then last year you bring in Jack Abraham, and then unfortunately he has an injury that prevents him from playing. And so they've brought in competition every year, with the exception of this year. And so. Is there a possibility of a transfer quarterback? Well, sure. But a lot of those guys are going to transfer and, walk on like Adam Gordon did, and so those are the things you have to think about is, you look at it right now and you think, hey, we got to do this. Well, they've attempted to do that. It just hadn't worked out real well for them because KJ couldn't read defenses and Jack Abraham couldn't stay healthy, and that's not a shot at Jack. That's just kind of the reality of the situation.
All right. So the Chris Parson thing is way down the road. And if this staff loses a third golden egg, and they'll be underdogs, and they should be, Can you roll out this same deal next year? The same offense that they're running with Leach doing the same thing with Will Rogers in 2023 without an all-out mutiny?
Well, I think you got to make some tweaks, and I think we've seen some of that this year, but probably not enough of them. It's like you see him running the football a little bit more in some games, and then Dylan Johnson gets hurt, and next thing you know, you're not running the football much at all when he and Quincy Sharp go out. And granted, you played Alabama and Georgia, but I think these next couple ball games you're going to see him run the football a little bit more. But Will has a ceiling. Every quarterback does, and he's not a guy that is going to go tuck it and run and really be a plus runner, but he does a lot of other things really well. But he's not a complete quarterback, and I think, is Parson a complete quarterback? We don't know. I don't know what his accuracy looks like and things of that nature, but the reality of it is that everybody's got to play a little bit better, not just Will Rogers, but everybody around him.
Do you think Leach has it in him at 61 years old to modify the offense like Lane, Browse, Kyle Shanahan, and all these guys that are running the air raid, Steve, Aranda, but they're just running a modified version of the air raid?
Yeah, I think he has to, in some respects, because, the game has changed. And if you look at what some people are doing, with the running game kind of complementing the air raid concept in and of itself, they're having some success, and so, yeah, I think he has to. I think that's one of the things that probably this offseason you've got to really address is putting in some new wrinkles and maybe making more of a commitment to run the football a little bit more. But, some of that too is, offensive line play has been good at times with pass pro, and I thought they were good this past weekend for the most part. They only give up the one sack, but there were still a handful of hurries and some passes that Will got flushed out of the pocket and had to just throw out of bounds. But, you've got to keep defenses a little more honest. You've got to put them in a situation where they can't just pin their ears back and say, okay, they're throwing. You got to at least plant a little half second of indecision in their minds. And, sometimes that's the difference between a big play and an incompletion.
Steve Robertson, Gene's Page, 247 Sports on the Out of Bounds show. This was not a staff that really embraced the transfer portal. Justin Robinson could be a nice player. Matthews is a nice player. Who's the offensive lineman, number 64, that's played pretty well?
Latoya.
Yeah.
And then you got Jordan Morant, and you got Jackie Matthews. They signed several transfers last year, and most of those guys were coming in a position of need. Latoya ends up being an interior guy, and you really needed a tackle, but
yeah.
I don't think they were averse to using the portal. I think they took what was available to them at the positions they had. They could have got an offensive tackle. I think you feel like they would have met all their needs. I think they met most of them last year. They didn't meet them all.
All right, but do we agree that they've got to that the clock is running out, and especially if they lose next Thursday night, and that they've got to get more dynamic and in a hurry on offense, whether that's at wide receiver or quarterback or both?
Yeah, I think that's the thing when you think about all this stuff. Like when we talk about recruiting, you're always looking to add to the top. That's one thing you were kind of opening with in this segment is you're always looking to add to the top. It's not just about bringing competition in at the middle. Is you're wanting to bring guys in. Justin Robinson's a guy that didn't have a lot of snaps early, but he's become a good player. He's not a difference maker, but he is a good player. The good thing is he's got 2 more years of eligibility left. Perhaps he becomes a dude in time. But you need to go get some one-year wonders. You know what I'm saying? You got to go get some guys and come in and make you better immediately. And I think maybe that's where maybe State missed the boat last year is you got some good pieces, and you got some guys that got some eligibility, but you didn't get a lot of guys that make you better day one.
All right. So I know you want to handicap it next week, but East Tennessee State's a garbage game. So I would think they're going to prepare all week for Ole Miss, or most of the week. I'm sorry. I know a day or two will be dedicated to East Tennessee State. Do you agree that they'll start game planning for Ole Miss this week?
I don't think there's any question. East Tennessee State is 3-7, and you could probably run base offense and defense and play pretty vanilla and just out-athlete those guys. You can't take it for granted, but I think you've got to commit some staff to kind of preparing for Ole Miss, and whether that's putting in wrinkles or doing some things, some opponent-specific blitzes and things like that. So, yeah, I think with the short work week, you've got to take advantage of some of this time this week because you have the advantage in the schedule with an FCS opponent.
Yeah. Ole Miss has the advantage with the game at home. They're more talented. But with the schedule this weekend, Mississippi State has an advantage. Do you think that Leach needs to shake up the staff? Not everybody, but some.
Well,
without naming names, do you think that he needs to make – I mean, this is the SEC, and I think this is a pretty average staff on paper. Do you think that 2, 3, 4 spots need to be looked at?
You know, I think when you take it piece by piece, you know, I think Jason Washington has gotten more production out of the running backs, and he has been a guy that has done a good job in the portal for you. I think Steve Spurrier is probably your best out-of-state recruiter. Some of his guys got to do a better job catching the football. Drew Hollingshead, of course, is brand new, so the jury in many respects is kind of out, you know, on him. I think Mason Miller is what flipped a guy, a Power 5 guy, each year that he's been here in the final week. And so, you know, I think the development is there. I think you've got to go out and identify some pieces. There's not a lot of Charles Crosses out there, but, you know, you look at this offensive line, even as well as they played at times, it's not your prototypical Mike Leach air raid offensive line. So you'd like to be able to recruit more Albert Reese type guys and let them develop rather than go out and get some guys that maybe don't fit your metrics. But, you know, I think on the defensive side of the football, I think you like where you are for the most part. I mean, one thing I'll say, you know, defensive line-wise, I think you've recruited okay. I just don't know if the developmental piece has maybe been as strong as what Mississippi State people are accustomed to.
I agree.
You know, when David Turner, he could go get a guy that was a 3-star kid you beat Southern Miss for, next thing you know, he's getting NFL attention. You know, so that's where I think you've kind of got to figure it out there too is, you know, if you got to be a great coach and a great recruiter, and if you can't be both, you got to be great at one of those two. You got to be able to bring value somewhere.
So do you think Will is what he is? If that's the case, does this all come back to whether Leach will mask his deficiencies in what I just mentioned, misdirection, play action, jet sweeps?
Well, I still think there's a little room for Will to grow. I mean, I think Will would tell you the same thing. I don't think he's a finished product by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, everybody was talking about how they were wrong about Will, you know, and I think some of that's got to do with the quality of competition that we played then and we're playing now. The big question for State fans is like, okay, yeah, we can beat Arkansas and A&M when maybe they're not a great team, but what are we doing against elite defenses? And that's the thing, Mike Leach being an offensive guru, you know, that's where you expected to kind of make up some ground on the rest of the league. And so that's where I think the challenge is, you know, with Will and with Mike is, you know, how do you close the gap between the top teams in the Southeastern Conference? You've proven you can compete with your contemporaries, but how do you close the gap?
Recruiting, right?
Yeah, but it's always about recruiting and development. But, you know, I'd much rather have that guy that LSU in Florida wants than the kid that, you know, Southern Miss and UAB want.
Yeah,
you know?
After 12 years of winning, you need to get out of that. You need to start beating TCU, Oklahoma. You're never going to be as aggressive as Ole Miss. You're not going to be near as aggressive as Auburn or Tennessee. I'm taking Bama and LSU and Georgia out. You got to start heck, Jeff Collins beat both Moorhead and Leach's staff on players, and I know that didn't work out. You've got to beat Georgia Tech, South Carolina, Oklahoma State, Kentucky, and TCU for players. I think people are tired of the nonsense of UAB and Southern Miss and Troy type beating those schools for players. How do you see that, Steve?
Yeah, I thought last year they'd kind of taken a step more towards doing that. You know, this year there's a lot more of those, you know, Cam Young type guys that are kind of diamonds in the rough. And you got to take some of those guys in your home state, but you can't build a class around those guys. You've got to be able to – and this year you don't have a ton of headliners in state. You do have some, but, you know, it's not like it was, you know, a few years ago, you know, when you had, you know, Jeff Simmons and A.J. Brown, those guys. You don't have a lot of head turners in this class, but – so this year you expect to be down a little bit when it comes to the offer sheets. But the reality of it is in order for State to really expand its recruiting footprint and push ahead to begin narrowing that talent gap is you got to start winning some bigger battles out of state.
Especially in where Louisiana and Alabama, the players that don't get.
Yeah, I think northern Louisiana's always got to be a sweet spot for state. I mean, you got Dylan Day from over there, and you got Dak Prescott, of course, from over there, and a lot of those kids have been the architects. 4.5 hours away from Baton Rouge, and so many of them have never even been to an LSU ball game, so they don't grow up with it. And then there's a melting pot of fans. You got Arkansas fans, you got state fans, Texas fans. So there's not as much local pressure. And so I think that I-20 corridor is a place that you have to prioritize.
What do you make of, you hit on something earlier, and I think this is where I was wrong on Leach and his staff. I thought that they would be Dan Mullen-esque at developing players, and they haven't been. So where do you fall on that? Do you agree that they haven't? I mean, the D-line's not getting better. Are the wide receivers getting better? I don't think. I mean, people want to give everybody under Leach on the offensive side the benefit of the doubt. Are the wide receivers getting better? If they are, I don't see it.
Well, I think they were earlier in the year, but like this, you can't have all these drops in second half of the season. And as much as we throw the football, you're going to have some. I mean, that's just the numbers work against you there. But Ra Thomas is a guy that has got to be a dude for state. He had some really big drops against Georgia, and he's not alone. I don't want to single him out, but I think that's the real challenge for offense is you rep it out, and you have everybody catch thousands of football when the jug's gone. Well, maybe what you're doing is not working as well as it should because you can't throw the ball the way we do and then have the drops that we did. And granted, Georgia's got a better talent level, but they have one, maybe two drops. And one of those is probably an out route that most receivers never get to. It's kind of like that shortstop that's got better range. Ordinarily it'd just be a base hit, but because he's got the footwork to get there. And so you got to be able to handle the basic fundamental elements of football. You throw it, you catch it. You snap it, you kick it. And that was the thing. Like the special teams. It's amazing to me that Mike Leach blows up the staff, goes out and gets all these new specialists, and then a lot of these issues still persist. Now, in the return game, you've made some strides, but, with extra points and field goals, it's been up and down, and punting the last couple of weeks has been horrendous.
Yeah, Georgia punted once, so that guy doesn't really ever get any work. He punted it for 55 yards, and I'm not sure exactly what Mississippi State was doing as far as punting on Saturday. So I think from what I gather from you, this all comes down to the golden egg, right?
I think for this season it does. And I think, for state, you need to win it and then get some juice in the offseason because you beat East Tennessee State and somehow win the egg and possibly a bowl game. Then you end the year on a 3-game winning streak. You got 9 wins with one of the most difficult schedules in the country. I think you can make a case you're headed in the right direction. And I think 8-4 was probably the number that most people said, hey, you know what, if we go 8-4 this year, if we're a game better, considering the schedule we have, we're heading in the right direction. And you go 8-4, you get the egg back, then the bowl game's kind of a bonus. But, you need some juice headed into the offseason. You need some juice headed into signing day. And so it's a very, very important egg bowl, probably the most important one of Mike Leach's 3-year tenure.
The Out of Bounds Show is brought to you by Dallas Body Shop in Ridgeland. When you look at guys like they signed Percy Lewis, number 1 JUCO offensive tackle. I think it's DeCarlos Nicholson. He was either number 1 or top 5 JUCO corners. Travion Williams, many people believe was the best player in the state of Mississippi. I think if he played at Madison Central, Oxford, Starkville, Brandon, he would have been given that nod or a much closer nod to Branson Robinson. I can't remember the 4th that they battled Ole Miss and actually other SEC suitors on. Those guys aren't contributing at a level that I think the fan base thinks if you're developing at the level you need to be developing at, they should have more of an impact right now. Maybe not the first 6 games of the year, but maybe the last 5 or 6, Steve. Where do you stand on that?
The thing I would say on the defensive line, I mean, you've got, on defense especially, you've got all juniors and seniors, so it's difficult to allocate reps for an underclassman. Trevion has played a few games, and John Lewis has played a few games. Of course, both those guys have banged up a little bit too. But, I think that's where State maybe had some depth this year where you didn't have to count on them, but you'd like to have seen them get a few more reps in some of these blowouts, like against Arkansas and against A&M, later in those games, and save some wear and tear on your regular guys. But you got to get their feet wet, because a lot of those guys are going to be competing for starting positions next year. I think that's probably one of the things we've kind of missed the boat on.
Is John Lewis healthy out of Germantown?
Yeah, he is, but he's just behind a couple guys. But he was a guy early on that got banged up in fall camp, and it took him a while to hit the field, and even longer before he got to be 100%. But we still have really high hopes for him.
Okay. Well, when you mentioned the juniors and seniors on the D line, I get that, but all of them are just solid SEC players outside of Crumity, and so my thinking would be that Travion Williams, if he's getting the coaching and development he needs to get, then good hell, he should at least be playing 10 more snaps a game. Do you think that's fair or no?
Yeah, possibly. And that's another thing too. We don't have the benefit of going to practice. So I don't know how well he knows his assignments. I don't know how well he knows his technique, and so you would suspect the guy with his natural ability though would find a way to kind of command 10, 15 more snaps a ball game. He hadn't done that yet. Of course, that's not a criticism of him because we don't know all the ins and outs of it. But the reality of it is he's a very talented young guy that has a very high ceiling. And I don't know, if you want to, I don't know how many games he's played in this year. I mean, maybe that's part of the issue too. Maybe they're thinking, maybe we can redshirt him this year. Let him play in 4 games of redshirt. We'll see. But I hadn't done the math on that to see exactly how many games he's played in. But that might be part of the issue too.
All right, we'll leave it there. Steve Robertson, Gene's Page, 247 Sports, the Boneyard Podcast, kind of laying it out. And 10 days from now is that this game is always big. I think it's beyond huge and big for the Mississippi State staff. Steve, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it, man.
All right, buddy. See you.
Gene's Page, 247 Sports, the Boneyard Podcast. So I was trying to think of who maybe the 4th recruit. Travion Williams was a 93, okay? He was a 5th-ranked player in the state of Mississippi. Now, obviously, he looks great. I mean, we've all seen him. What is he, 21? Number 21, I think he is. I mean, he looks great in uniform. That doesn't always, mean anything. I'm going through. Percy Lewis was a 90 offensive tackle, number one JUCO player. And okay, Nicholson was not as high as I thought, but 88. He was the 4th best corner in JUCO. And that's really, I don't really see any. Xavion Thomas is up here, and he is playing.
Not on offense, though, really.
Yeah, special teams, my bad. That was a cool little punt return that he made.
It's amazing what happens when guys who are athletic get the ball.
Yeah, and he's bigger frame than Tulu. You have to wonder what he could be. You also got to keep him happy. Again, when these guys go home, everything's on the table. I mean, it was already kind of on the table, but when these guys go home for Christmas holidays, ask Mekhi Polk. Everything's on the table. Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone ESPN, brought to you by Dallas Body Shop in Ridgeland. For all your collision repair, Dallas Body Shop in Ridgeland. The show is also brought to you by the leading supplier of hardwoods and cypress in the Southeast, Cypress Depot. CypressDepot.com in Ridgeland. See you tomorrow.